No one was allowed to drill into it or set explosions on its surface to take away bits of its body it might have a use for later. If life was taken, it was replaced by new life. Though a small planet whose surface consisted of little more than 2 ice caps and a sea between them, Petaybee had nevertheless made a lot of progress since its terraforming. But it wasn't enough. Petaybee had to make other kinds of places where more life forms could live. There was too much sea, too much ice. If there were warm places, dry places where life could begin, that life could become part of the cycle too, and would add its own special gifts to its world. Though Petaybee was a world that could, as humans understood it, think, this idea was not a thought or even a true idea as such. It was a compulsion that expressed itself as a build-up of pressure in one particular area. Here. Land belonged here. The sea felt particularly empty and limitless at that point, but moreover, Petaybee actually felt as if it contained a continent within its core, a continent that belonged in this place where now waves rolled on and on. Some shoreline was needed, some beach, and eventually some trees and flowers perhaps, other plants and animals. Yes, as industriously and deliberately as a 2-legged dweller might move the furniture inside a house, Petaybee began rearranging its own interior to create what belonged on the surface. This was not easy, even for an entire sentient planet with a sense of purpose. The landmasses were too far to move them to the empty spot without destroying all of the other life. Besides, the ice would melt and upset everything. The only efficient way to get land in the right spot was to bring it up from the inside, up through the bottom of the sea. And so Petaybee hacked and coughed and spewed and shot its red-hot inner essence up into the seabed, where some of the minerals within the hot sulfurous gas and magma turned into hollow rock towers that became chimneys for other eruptions. As the hot vents opened like red mouths, Petaybee swallowed great gouts of seawater. It mixed with the minerals and the molten rock, then, superheated and full of nutrients, it shot back into the sea. When it cooled, it was a warm nutrient for new life. New species of plants and animals sprang up all over. They were not bothered by the sulfurous waters, but thrived in them. Petaybee thought this was as it should be, but then Petaybee had a very large view of things. It took no particular notice of the other life forms lurking near its new cauldron, the ones not of its own creation. Until that point, the planet's creation had blossomed in relative obscurity. The people had neither navy or civilian fleets, no boats in fact, but those used for subsistence, fishing, and hunting. Flybys were rare. There was no satellite surveillance. Once, a seal had swum by, pausing to observe the volcano's birth with interest, but he was on his way elsewhere. Only now, with the newest of the life forms in place, was Petaybee's work monitored, though it was done so unobtrusively that the preoccupied planet took no notice. Gradually, the lava built up the floor of the sea around its chimneys. It was good, but too slow. Heaving and squeezing, Petaybee pushed magma and gas up through the center of the elevated sea bottom. Once the pressure built up, it would blow a hole big enough to gush rivers of lava out into the sea. It would build up and up and up until it rose above the waves. Then begin spreading out until it was a new place, a new home. Though it would be hot and hazardous at first, the seawater and air would cool it, until it too was a warm place for life to flourish. Though volcanoes had created land masses on Petaybee shortly after terraforming, it had happened very quickly, while the planet was barely awake. This new volcano, this new island, was a conscious effort, Petaybee's greatest work to date. But work it was. A lot of work. As birthing mothers everywhere knew very well, the process of bringing life into the world was called labor for a reason. Chapter 1. The Changelings twins gave almost simultaneous burps of repletion, the boy on his mother's shoulder and the girl on her father's, and were carefully laid on their backs on their fur-lined cots. Sean and Yana made no move to leave the nursery. Unable to leave the sight of their offspring, safely delivered just a few hours earlier, the babies looked up at their parents, their dark, pewter eyes as brightly focused as those of any bird. Each already wore a soft crown of deep brown downy hair, but Yana would have been hard-pressed to decide whose nose or cheeks they had. Everything was still rounded and squashy, unformed and utterly adorable. Even their contented gurgles sounded for all the world like the chortle of a small and active brook swirling among stones. "Listen to them," Yana said fondly. "They sound as if they're laughing." Then, "I thought it took longer than that for babies to do things like laugh." Sean shrugged. "Babies who are always and entirely human, perhaps, but a Silky's development is a bit different. I don't recall when exactly I developed what, but I do recall being aware of my surroundings almost at once. But as to the details, well, too bad my parents aren't still around to advise us." But Yana, lost in wonder at the perfection of her children, answered him only with a dreamy glance. "It's almost too much joy for one person to bear," she murmured, feeling tears come to her eyes. Sean took her in his arms. "Then let's share it. I smell food, and you're still feeding too, one at a time." He gave her a hug and a cuddle, and one arm draped on her shoulders, propelled her gently toward the door of the cube they had hastily attached to one side of the cabin to serve as a nursery. It was spare and Spartan, except for the furred cots, for it was the custom in Kilcool to refrain from giving expecting parents items for their unborn children. A superstition, really, but since Yana, before conceiving, had thought herself well past childbearing age, it seemed wise to encourage every sort of good luck. As Sean opened the door, Nanook, his black and white track cat, and Coaxtell, his niece Aoife's snow leopard, slid into the nursery. Nanook took a place under the boy's cot, while Coaxtell, after one long look at her charge, flopped beside the girls. "The sentries are on the job," Sean said, and continued to push his wife to the door. "I just never thought I'd have children," Yana said, looking back over her shoulder at her twins, even as Sean closed the door behind her. He left it slightly ajar so they could hear the babies if they cried out or if one of the cats needed to go out or get their attention. No smells had been able to penetrate the cube from the main part of the house, Yana's old one-room cabin. Now, however, delicious odors of pepper and snow onions, roasting fish, and unidentifiable savory spices wafted from the stove. Over it stood the substantial and comforting bulk of Clodagh, the village's Shanachie, singer of songs, bearer of culture, rememberer of history, settler of disputes, healer of wounds, and dispenser of medicines. She had also served as Yana's midwife. "It's about time," Clodagh said, closing the lid of the pot she had been seasoning. "I thought you'd never think of yourselves. Now, sit and eat. And Yana, use that longy thing," as she pointed a ladle at a chaise longue that had recently made its appearance in their home. There was no prescription against giving an expectant mother a gift for herself. The chaise, which took up a good half of the wall next to the wood stove, had seemed too large and in the way before, but now Yana found it inviting. "Get your feet up and relax, as much as you can, that is," she added in an affectionately derisive tone. Major Yanaba Maddock Changelings was quite willing to assume the seat.